Bibles with you this morning, I invite you to open them to the book of Proverbs, the 16th chapter of Proverbs, to be specific. In just a little while, we're going to be looking at some different verses from Proverbs, but we'll be starting in Proverbs 16, so if you'll turn there, please. On Sunday morning, we're in a sermon series. We began it about a month ago. It'll go through the summer. It's entitled Questions and Answers. Questions that God's people have and Bible answers for those questions. Questions that God's people have. Questions that can be answered by going to the Bible. For every question you and I might have about faith issues, the Bible has the answer. How to find God's will is the question this morning. Now, I realize some of these questions don't apply to everybody sometimes. And some of you like to take a nap when it don't apply to you. But this question applies to everybody. Everybody will ask themselves this question before your Christian life is over. How to find God's will. Lord, what do you want me to do? Have you ever asked that question? Lord, what do you want me to do? Should I get married, Lord? If so, who am I to marry, Lord? How about John, Jay, Jerry? Should I marry them? What about Susie or Sharon or Stacy? Lord, do you want me to get married? And if you do, who do I marry? I got so many choices. Should I go to college, Lord? Do you want me to go to college, Lord? If you do, where do I go? There's so many choices out there. There's the Clemson Tigers. There's the Carolina Gamecocks. There's the Georgia Bulldogs. There's the Alabama Crimson Tide. Where do I go, Lord? Should I change jobs, Lord? Should I, Lord? If so, Lord, where do I go from here? And do I change jobs today? Do I change jobs next week? Do I change jobs next month? Do I change jobs next year? Lord, should I have this surgery? If so, who does it? Doctor number 1? Doctor number 2? Doctor number 3? Which doctor I choose behind the curtain? Lord, should I invest my money? If I should, Lord, where should I invest it? Stocks and bonds? CDs? Gold? Silver? Should I just put it under my mattress? You see, we got a lot of questions. Not just questions about faith, but questions about life. And wouldn't it be so much easier, wouldn't it be so much better if God just sent us a Western Union telegram? They still do that, I guess. I'm old school. But wouldn't it be wonderful if God just texted us, tweeted us, chirped us? Pastor, what is chirping? I don't know, I just threw that in. Wouldn't it be so much better if God just gave us an answer? In regard to our relationships, yes, no, that'd be easy. In regard to our colleges, Tigers, Gamecocks. In regard to our jobs, stay put, move on. In regard to our health, fix it or live with it. In regard to our financial affairs, spend it or save it. Wouldn't you wish God would just kind of whisper just little brief messages? But He doesn't, does He? Oh, God speaks, don't get me wrong. He's always speaking. But He doesn't always speak to the matters that we want Him to speak to in the way that we want to hear from Him. So what do when we have all of these questions that can have a dramatic influence on our life here and our life in eternity? Well, we do the best we can do, don't we? We grab for all the straws that we can get. We talk to all the people we can talk to. We think through all the ways that things could turn out. But the bottom line is, we make decisions with our fingers crossed and the roll of the dice. That's how most of us determine the will of God. What I want to do this morning is teach you something that will be very helpful to you. And we're going to go to 4 verses because we're going to learn about the sovereignty of God. I think that has to do with God's will and God's will for us. The fact that He is a sovereign God, His will be done. And when we know His will will be done in us easier and better. And then I'm going to close out by giving you 4 principles that you can take with you to help you understand how to determine where God's will might be at, where God's way might be at, as you ponder things that you might be thinking of even today. So let's begin with Proverbs 16, verse 9. Now you need your Bibles so you can follow. You'll get much more out if you have your Bibles and look at them. Proverbs 16:9. These are verses about the sovereignty of God, particularly over the will and way of man. Proverbs 16:9 says this. I'm reading from the New King James on all of these verses. A man's heart plans his way. A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. This word directs that you're looking at in your verse, Proverbs 16, verse 9, is a very strong word in the Hebrew. It essentially means that every step we take, we have planned it, we prepared for it, we take the step. Every step we take, God allows it. And it's controlled by His power. You say, but I planned it. Did you? I prepared for it. Did you? Because what the writer of Proverbs is saying, we can plan, we can prepare, we can take the step. But God, in His omnipotence, His power, He is the one who allows us to take that step. He's the one who controls the steps that we take. We can plan and proceed on the front end, but God always has His way on the back end. Did you get that? Let's move on. Now we're talking about the sovereignty of God over the decisions we make, which are called steps in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 16, verse 33. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every direction is from the Lord. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every direction is from the Lord. When the writer of Proverbs is writing this, it was common practice in that day that if you had a decision to make, you actually made it through gambling devices. In other words, it says that's what lot is cast is talking about. It's talking about things that you do that in regard to gambling, and in regard to giving you options. In other words, the writer of Proverbs is saying, you might think that Lady Luck is behind the decisions you're making. You might think fate is behind the decisions you're making. You might think that rolling the dice, what comes up on those dice is just chance, purely chance. You might think that if you put all these colored stones in the bag, and if a red one comes out, this is what you do. If a blue one comes out, this is what you do. If they all come out, that's what you do. And if none comes out, you're in trouble. You might think you just flip a coin. How many of you have done that? What is the writer of Proverbs saying to us? You can roll the dice if you want. You can shake the bag if you want and bring out the colored balls. You can flip all the coins you want. God is in control of every single bit of it. God will determine what comes up on those dice. God will determine what color marble comes out of that bag. God will determine whether it's heads or tails. God is sovereign over everything. And when He wants to communicate His will and way, He can do it through those devices. Nothing is random. God controls everything. Now you got your ears on because I'm trying to get you to grasp this. That God is sovereign over everyone and everything. He's the creator of everyone, everything. He's the Lord over everyone and everything. He is sovereign. He's supreme. Nothing catches Him off guard. There's no happenstance. There's no chance. There's no fate. There's no luck. Even when we make bad choices, God's sovereignty overrides them. He is going to have His will and way. Proverbs 19, verse 21. You plan, you prepare, but God's going to override you eventually if you're not doing what He wants you to do. Going the way He wants you to go. Proverbs tells us that you can do all of the chance things you want to do, but God's going to control where those numbers go, where balls come out. Whether it's heads or tail. Proverbs 19:21. There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel, that will stand. There are many options, many plans that a man can have in his mind and heart. Many choices. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel, the Lord's plan, is what will eventually stand. We can plan, we can double plan. We can prepare, we can double prepare. But God's will wins in the end. When all is said and done, look up here at me, God gets His way. When all is said and done, God gets His way. Now some of you are still trying to... But I thought we're free will moral agents, Pastor. I thought we make our own choices and our own decisions. We do. We do. But God sovereignly, who has a plan and purpose for all of us, He's also working to bring about His will, His way, His plan, His purpose for our lives. And He's doing it, and we don't even know He's doing it. Proverbs 20:24. The last verse. A man's steps are of the Lord. How then can a man understand his own way? A man's steps are of the Lord. How then can a man understand his own way? Now I want you to see that word, a man's steps. Because it's an interesting word the writer of Proverbs uses for man's steps. This word man comes from a Hebrew word that's different than the second man that's listed there and the Hebrew word that's used for that. The man that begins the 2024, a man's steps. This is speaking of a particular man. A man who has wealth. A man who has might. A man who has education. A man who has talent. A man who thinks that he is in control. Do you know anybody like that? They believe that they're the master of their ship. They're the captain of their destiny. They're in charge. They have the wisdom. They have the wealth. They have the power. They have the savvy. They have the influence. What they want is what they get. But you know something? They can see the past. They can see the present. But I don't care how wealthy and educated you are. I don't care how powerful and experienced and talented you are. There is nobody that can see the what? The future. So at best, we only see part of the puzzle. None of us ever see the whole picture as we're making our plans and preparing to carry them out. We cannot see the future. We do not have all the facts in front of us. We cannot understand the whole. There is only one who knows the past, the present, and the future, and it is God Himself. God sees, God knows, God understands. We only see in part. We only understand in part. But God sees the whole. We see the puzzle. God sees the painted portrait. Now, having said all of that, and much of it's redundant because the writer of Proverbs is saying the same thing over and over again. Yes, we're free will moral agents. Yes, we're to plan. Yes, we're to prepare. Yes, we're to take action. But there's a sovereign God over us, and He is having His will and His way even as we think we're doing it. God's way is always done. God is always in control. God's way always wins. God's wisdom and power always brings about what He wants. And if we will seek God willingly, openly, compliantly, obediently, all of these things will work out. Because God will always not only have His will and way, God's will and way is always right and best. Does that make sense to you? I can take this step. I can take this action. But God, if He doesn't want me to take this step and this action, He eventually is going to neutralize it and change it. Because He has the last word. His will and His way will always be done. Always will be done. His plan and purpose will always be fulfilled. Now, having said that, let's look at 4 principles that we're to use in trying to find God's will and God's way. Because God's will and way is going to be done. For some of us, it will be done peacefully and joyfully because we're looking for it and that's what we want. For others of us, God's will and way is going to be done through a lot of headaches and heartaches because we're stubborn and we won't listen. But God says, that's okay. You do what you want to do. Eventually, I'm going to bring you back where I want you to be. Now, it can be easy or it can be hard. You make the choice. So you say, well, Pastor, how can I have an insight then? What is God's will and way? Because I want to make sure that His will is my will and His way is my way. And I want to make sure that I don't have to pay the price to get there. I'd rather start out doing what He wants me to do rather than go doing my own thing and He has to bring me back. So, Pastor, what's the principles? Principle number 1, I want to know the will of God. I want to know the way of God. In matters of faith and matters of life. I understand God's will and God's way is going to be done. And I understand that it can be done with my compliance or it can be done with my resistance, but it's going to get done. It can be done with God patting me on the back. It can be done with God paddling my tail with a paddle. But God is going to have His will and way. How do I determine what that is on the front end? First of all, gather all the information you can get before you make a choice. Gather all the facts pertaining to what you're going to decide on. Gather all the information. Employ common sense. God works in the realm of biblical sense and common sense. Seek counsel from wise people. Everybody in this sanctuary ought to have 2 or 3 people they could go to at any time, confident that these people walk with God and they will give godly wisdom, they will give godly direction, they will give godly counsel. And if you don't have such people, you need to have such people. So you gather all the facts and information. You think through things using biblical sense and common sense. You go and talk with people who are far more knowledgeable in faith and life than you are. But you trust them and they're going to guide you with their words. Then you begin to pray for divine leadership. You actually pray, Lord, I want to know your will. I don't want my will, I want your will, Lord. But I don't know what your will is. You're a God of revelation. Speak to me that I might know. You pray specifically about the matter. And then you wait to hear from God. You see, we don't like the word wait, do we? Do you like the word wait? No. And I don't either. We want something, we want it now. Lord, if you don't mind, can the next 10 minutes, can you let me know what to do? God is in no hurry. God is in no rush. The only people who hurry, the only people who rush are fools because they don't know no better, and the devil because his time's almost up. God has always been, He'll always be, and He takes His time. And we wait on Him. We wait on Him. Secondly, principle 2. Principle number 1, we gather everything we can gather in the way of facts and information, counsel and advice. And we put it all together and wait on God to speak to us in a way that we might have some insights where to go with this. Secondly, we do not expect 100% certainty when we have to make our choice and decision. There's no absolutes from our perspective when we deal with God. We trust Him. The just shall walk by what? Faith. Faith does not always know everything, but it knows enough to trust God and move forward in a certain direction, to make a certain choice, to make a certain decision. When you go back to Hebrews 11 and look at God's Hall of Fame, what do you think? Do you think Noah saw the whole portrait when he was building that ark? I mean, we look at the children's stories and Noah's building the ark and seeming he knows everything that's going to happen. I submit to you, Noah had a piece of the puzzle. He didn't have the whole puzzle, but he trusted God. He knew that this was the will of God. This was the way of God. He didn't know how it was all going to flesh out and pan out. Neither did Abraham. God said to Abraham, go look for a city. Abraham said, what city? God said, I'm not going to tell you. Lord, which way do I go? He just said, go. Lord, how do I know when I'll get there? You won't. I'll tell you. So Abraham, he didn't have all of the information. He didn't have all the facts, but he knew enough that he could make a biblical, intelligent, common sense, biblical sense choice. You think Moses at the Red Sea knew what was going to happen? We have our sermon series on Sunday night. Do you think whoever's got that sermon, that they knew what was going to happen? Well, we'll always picture Moses cool as a cucumber, just strutting out there, and everybody's looking around. He's waving at everybody. Then he holds that thing up, and you think it was that way? You think Joshua had the full story as he's marching around Jericho? You think David had the full story when he went out to face Goliath? Do you think Daniel had the full story? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had the real story. Paul had the whole story. Peter had the whole story. Listen to me, they did not. But they did all they could do, humanly speaking. And then they took action, believing that if their will was wrong, God would change it with His will. If their way was wrong, God would change it with His way. And He would have. But they didn't want to make a mistake, so they waited. And then they moved with their fingers crossed because they really didn't know what was going to happen. And neither do we. And if you're waiting on 100% certainty, you'll never get married. You listen to me? You'll never get married because there's nobody who can give you 100% certainty. You'll never have a perfect job. You'll never have anything in life if having full 100% certainty is the basis for you making a decision. Principle number 3. If you desire to know God's will, He will reveal it. Now, He will not reveal it, as I said earlier, the way we would like it. Lord, I'm going to college. Where should I go? Save that tiger. Save that tiger. No. No, He doesn't do that. But He'll let us know. Think of Aaron Wilburn, a dear friend of this church and many of you, and he's in heaven now, but he often told the story when he came and that he wanted to know if it was God's will for him to get a box of hot Krispy Kreme donuts. And so he went to the Krispy Kreme store and he said, Lord, if it's your will that I have a whole box of these hot Krispy Kreme donuts, you will provide a parking place for me up front, close. And so he pulled into Krispy Kreme and he went around the Krispy Kreme, but there was no parking place. So he went back around. There was no parking place. He went back around. There was no parking place. Do you know on the 7th time, God spoke to him and said, it is my will you have that whole box of hot Krispy Kreme donuts because there was now a parking place waiting on him. You see, wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't try to manipulate God's will and God's way to get our will and way? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't do that? Because remember, you do that on the front end, God's going to change it all on the back end anyway. And you're going to have all the headaches and heartaches that go with it. God will reveal, but He reveals in His time and His way. God reveals to those who really want to know His will and way. If you're not interested in it, no more than a thief would be interested in a policeman, then God will just let you do what you want to do. But you said, Pastor, He's sovereign. He is sovereign, and He will exert His sovereignty on the back end and get done what He wanted to do on the front end. Principle 4. When you've done everything you know to do, you make the decision and trust God. You just can't sit in limbo land forever on decisions. You've got to make a decision. You've gathered the information. You've done all of the things you're supposed to do. You've prayed for God's will. You've asked Him to reveal it. then you just have to take a step and do it. Once again, trust and faith. Trust God to make it all work out. So, in closing, time is up. Pastor, I've got a question. Lord, what am I to do in this matter? Do your due diligence. Do not expect 100% certainty. Truly listen to what God is saying and do it. Make a decision and press on. Remember, God is going to have His will in your life. He's going to have His way in your life. He's going to have it on the front end because you're compliant to all of the principles I just told you. Or He's going to have it on the back end because you're hard-headed and stubborn and you're going to do it your way. But ultimately, when everything is said and done, God wins. His will be done. His way will be done. And either you will be compliant with it or He will change your mind about it. Heads are bad. Owls are closed. Pastor, I've got a decision to make this morning.